Section 3. A step in the right direction. Now we can start the real fun stuff. The biggest solution we can work on is a concept that encompasses many simple and complex solutions. That is, the pursuit to be as self-sufficient and sustainable as possible. I know that is easier said than done, and different people have different situations limiting their options. So I will try to keep things simple. And remember, just take baby steps, because every little bit helps. Let's begin by identifying what the necessities for life are. They can be split into two categories. The first, the big three needed for survival, including water, food, and shelter. And the second, what is needed to operate in our culture. This would include the rest of the things that are not necessarily needed to survive, but are recognized as necessary to function in our communities. As these are numerous and differ depending on your situation, I will list some when I get to them. For now, let's talk about the big three. The most important is water, as a human can only last about 3 days without water. However, it is also one of the more complex issues dependent on your location, so I will be saving it for last. Arguably, the second most important would be shelter. Though exposure can kill faster than dehydration, in the wild and in the urban jungle, it is often easier to locate the materials for a simple shelter than it is to find clean, drinkable water. Once again, I will save this topic for later. So I will start with the least of the three, as most people can last over a week without food before suffering severe health issues. Also, it is one of the simplest to start working on. So, Section 3, Subsection 1, Food. Anybody can reduce their dependence on the system for food, whether you are a landowner or homeless. The simplest step you can take is research your local wild edibles. Now, I'm not saying to go out and start grazing on your front lawn because Google says the weeds are edible. What I am saying is do your research and find what helps you most. I am sure you know at least one wild edible you like to enjoy when it is in season. I am also sure there is at least one plant in your environment that you would be surprised just how useful it can be. Pretty much all environments people live in have something to harvest throughout the year. And if you are lucky enough to live in a place as wonderful as the Pacific Northwest like I do, you can find something to harvest during every season. Once you find the edibles that you enjoy, then you only need to learn the difference between passive grazing and actively harvesting. Occasionally picking and eating, or even collecting small amounts for a recipe once or twice a season is good, but it will not make much impact on your budget. However, after gathering a large quantity and preserving at least half of what you collect, then even if you only get a few ounces, you can still supplement a meal or a snack with your efforts later. Of course, don't limit yourself to the techniques you can think of off the top of your head. Definitely do not allow yourself to be discouraged because of obstacles you see in your way. I'm sure many of you are thinking of the same issues I have to deal with, primarily being a severe lack of freezer space preventing me from storing a large quantity of frozen foods. I also have limited cupboard space, preventing me from storing too many canned foods as well. However, I am starting to practice a preservation technique that does not take up a lot of space. That is, making fruit leathers. By grinding berries or fruit into a puree and then straining out the juice with a fine cheesecloth or other form of sifting material, you are left with a thick paste. Now, many indigenous people simply dried this on a flat rock in the sun, but with access to an oven or food dehydrator, you can speed up the process. It also helps to add a little cornstarch to the paste before spreading it out to help it retain a more gelatinous form. Once completely dry, you are left with something similar to a fruit roll-up that will last for a long time if stored properly, while also being quite thin and taking up very little space. One final aspect of wild edibles would be wild meats. In my home state, we have regular salmon runs in our rivers, bringing lots of fish available to those willing to spend the time to catch them. We also have numerous wild animals that are legal to hunt if you are willing. Not many considered by most modern people as a source of protein, such as squirrels, rabbits, and bullfrogs. Other animals on the hunting list that are prevalent in my area are raccoons, crows, and coyotes, but due to disease, parasites, and other taboos, I am led to believe these are not the best choice for wild meat. Nevertheless, always do your own research and make up your own mind. In any case, meat being one of the most expensive proteins you can buy, any way to supplement it is a big impact on your budget. However, unless you have an abundance like the salmon runs we see to supplement your food, protein might be more efficient to focus on in the later stage of food production that I will get into soon. For now, once you are comfortable with the wild edibles in your region and familiar with different techniques for preserving the foods, you are ready to move on to the next stage of food production, and that is not so wild edibles. From fruit trees and berry bushes that are in other people's yards to small farm stands on the edge of properties people build, allowing the community to share the local produce, there are many ways to take advantage of this source of food. Many people have fruit trees, nut trees, berry bushes, and other wild edibles on their property that are likely planted as part of original homesteading, or at least as an accessory to a property during development. These sources of food are usually lightly used, if used at all. Also, permission is also easily gained by the landowner, as such things tend to pose a nuisance in the later seasons, with the amount of rotting produce left on the property, often attracting insects and other pests. Just a little scouting around your home should offer you numerous fruit trees, nut trees, and/or berry bushes. By accessing these, you are creating many benefits, including greatly increasing the potential yield of your harvest each season, often helping reduce a nuisance to a property, and increasing communal cohesion by interacting with other members of your community. I usually offer half of what I pick to the landowner, to which they often refuse, simply glad to see the produce used, rather than go to waste and cause the aforementioned nuisance. There is not much difference between wild edibles and edibles on personal property, other than the caution needed to be taken in attaining permission. Not only should you not harvest from land you are not sure you are allowed to remove produce from, but you should also take caution when seeking approval by looking for warning signs like closed gates, numerous no trespassing signs, and no soliciting signs. However, when you are scouting for these sources of edibles, you will come across some of the locations necessary for the next stage of food production, guerrilla gardening. Now, when I first heard the term coined, it was talking about people doing some very entertaining practices, such as planting vegetables in city sidewalk flower boxes, or other areas like potholes in city streets. However, that is only one aspect of what I would consider guerrilla gardening. What I am talking about is any time you utilize unused or otherwise unobstructive areas that are not your private property to grow edibles. This could be something as mundane as manicuring and propagating wild edibles. An example of this would be the wild strawberries I found growing along my driveway. Though I did live there, it was a rental, so I will call it a gray area. When I found them in their wild state, they did not flower, thus they did not produce any fruit. Then, after spending a little time on my hands and knees tearing up the moss and other vegetation in the area, they quickly doubled in size and began flowering and fruiting. Remember, once you find something in the wild you would like to help produce more, as I will say many times over, do your research and see what will help. Also, look into local laws and be respectful of the environment. The last thing you want to do is destroy one ecosystem trying to help another and end up damaging them both. This is why I think such tactics should be reserved for the urban jungle where much of the environment is already destroyed. This idea can also be expanded to the not-so-wild edibles, as long as you get permission first. I'm sure most people would be glad to accept your offer to groom their lawn, build gardening beds, or otherwise improve their property in the name of increasing food production. The next step is a little more broad and dependent on availability. You need to locate different sources of public land that are either unused or unobstructive areas you can either put a flower pot or plant vegetables directly into the ground. Examples of this would be things like planting vegetables along the walking paths in public parks. Or, if it's a city park, take a pair of matching decorative flower pots and place them on either side of the park bench and plant your vegetables in those. Yet, it is better to select an area that is already used for growing, like landscape flower gardens or already existing flower pots. If you place your plant with a stake or other protection, it will blend with the other vegetation and go unnoticed or otherwise not be considered a weed, allowing the present tenant to continue taking care of the plant for you. The next step, obviously, is personal gardening. Unfortunately, not everybody has their own land to be able to grow enough food to sustain themselves and their families. However, as I have said, every little bit helps. Even if you're renting a small place, you have the space that you can use for your needs. Even if your place is tiny and you think you do not have enough area, I am sure there are spots in your home that you are not using that can be adapted for gardening. One of my favorite space utilizing techniques I've seen is a shoe caddy that hangs on a door with several plastic pockets for the shoes. If you fill the plastic pouches with soil, you'll now have a couple of dozen little planters. Now, they don't hold much soil and cannot support a great fruiting plant like potatoes. It is, however, ideal for leafy greens like some lettuces and most herbs. Just imagine all the herbs you need for cooking growing freshly on the pantry door right in the middle of your kitchen. Then, when it needs to be cleaned, the caddy can easily be carried outside. Other examples are wall hangings and hanging baskets from the ceiling. If your building has rooftop access, you can work on a rooftop garden. Think of any other place reserved for you that you are not presently using, like a parking space for some city folk in apartments. Also, if you research hydroponic techniques, you can produce even more while using less space. Then, of course, the more land you have available outside your home, the more potential you have for food production. When it comes to a choice between your lawn and a garden, most people have to water their lawn because they don't live somewhere like the Pacific Northwest where the sky does it for them. So, if you use the water on a garden rather than a lawn, you not only would have attractive vegetation if you spend the time to plant aesthetically, you will also get a return for all that work that is far more beneficial than just a green lawn. Hydroponics, raised beds, and shelving are all good ways to make the most out of what space you have available, while also giving opportunity for artistic flair. If you have plenty of space but no time to devote to growing your own food, aquaponics, permaculture, and perennial food forests are techniques you can look into that reduce your needed interaction in growing the food. Then, finally, if you have all the space and time in the world but still don't think you can produce enough so you can no longer need to visit the grocery store, remember, there are new techniques being developed every day, and many you may have never heard of, such as trench greenhouses that can allow food to be grown year-round, or hydroponic grow rooms with controlled environments and lighting, allowing vegetables to be grown in the middle of winter anywhere in the world. No matter what obstacle is in your way, you can find the answer if you just do some research to find them. If not, develop a solution on your own. Again, if you have plenty of space, then you have the opportunity to produce your own protein. Rabbits are a cheap source of lean red meat. However, they are problematic to contain in a pen. Also, aside from the inhumane nature of keeping them in cages, if you are breeding for meat stock, it requires numerous cages and a lot of work to maintain control and prevent excessive overbreeding. Chickens are a better choice, by my opinion, as not only are they far easier to contain and manage, they also produce eggs as well as being a source of meat. As long as you clip their wings, they are simple enough to corral and easy to contain. In fact, the strength of the pen is more dependent on keeping predators out than keeping the chickens in. If you have an acre to spare, another option is miniature cows, a breed my great-grandmother was trying to promote. It can be raised on 1 acre per cow, unlike the 3 to 5 acres per cow you need for the standard cattle. They also produce half the amount of meat, which is ideal for a single family's year's worth of meat. I am not sure what the market is like these days, but I know my great-grandmother had to buy her first cow from Scotland. I would also like to suggest the potential for production of insects. Not only does such a practice afford the opportunity to dispose of food waste that otherwise is unsuitable for composting or animal feed, but provides an abundant source of protein, even if you only use it for animal feed. Like everything else, you just need to do your research and find what options are available to suit your personal needs and means.